You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Tonight on Debate 13. Hello, welcome. This is Debate 13. I'm not David Tones. That's not me. I'm somewhere else. David is with us, by the way, at this moment in time. We're on Debate 13 and we're talking about those subjects that you just saw at the top of the hour there, and we're talking about many things besides, no doubt. I'm also joined by Dane and Devon this evening, and they're also with us. We're testing a few new things today, so we sort of saw David's trail there without actually seeing him. There is David at the bottom left-hand side of the screen.
Thank you.
How are you guys all this evening?
Good.
I am doing excellent this evening, Nathan.
Excellent. All right. In the meantime, things are taking a while to coordinate. I think we might have a latecomer. Now, we sort of just threw up those headlines without a particular explanation on them. We're talking about a few things tonight. The first one was about the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and that is because there's been quite a debate going on within our quarters in the last few days, talking about the Joint Typhoon Warning Center and how much of a good job is it doing, how is it faring up against the JMA, and many people say that it's better, and indeed that and people always seem to forget that the JTWC haven't been the official organisation over there for a while, and some people think that's a little bit of a travesty. In any case, I'm trying to get this thing to work. Could someone try and get Orlando onto the stream with us, by the way, because I can't actually do that from here. That's such a shame. I hope we can get him on shortly. But who would like to begin on the JTWC? They've been around for a very long time. They had the responsibility of the Western Pacific area, which is what most people associate it with, for a long time. They launched the Fleet Weather Service in 1959, and they flew recon flights until 1987, when they stopped in favour of new computerized technology. And now we can probably go on and on about that and how that might have been a mistake, because we're always forever complaining about recon, especially given what's been going on recently in terms of the typhoon activity. Who'd like to begin on for that?
I think I'll go first. I started following the Joint Typhoon Warning Center when Cyclone Yasi struck the tropical far north Queensland coast, across the coast over Cairns. But the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, as we know, is an arm of the US Navy. It was established on the island of Guam after multiple typhoons, including Typhoon Cobra, December 1944.
Typhoon Cobra, that's right. That's how the whole thing began, wasn't it, at the end of the Second World War.
In June 1945, Nathan caused a significant loss of men and ships. At this time, the centre was one of 3 Navy, 2 Air Force units responsible for tropical cyclone reconnaissance and warnings in the Pacific.
Well, we're not necessarily doing a whole recount of the history of the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre, but talking about recent years, David, how do you think their performance has actually been?
Well, let's have a look at their performance here in the Westpac over the last 2 months. I know you and I have had discussions even during our live broadcasting where the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre decided to the ante, if I could
Up the
use
ante.
that, yeah, up the ante by putting out a, I think it was a tropical storm force or tropical storm warning advisory.
You're losing me,
earlier.
David. You're losing me. Devon, where do you stand on the JTWC as it is today in 2018?
Well, this is definitely a ripe topic for Force 13 because this is definitely something that we need to decide on going forward. Is there necessarily any good meteorological authority in the Western Pacific that is able to monitor tropical weather? It seems like
question.
Yeah,
That's sort of what I'm getting
First-
onto the crux of the point, really. That is what it is right now. Yeah.
Now, the Southern Hemisphere, it seems to be fine. Mateo France does a great job in the Indian Ocean. The Bureau of Meteorology does a great job for Australia, and Fiji has their own service as well, and they do fine. And the JTWC seems to do okay for the Southern Hemisphere. Not perfect, because after all, it is an automated system. But
It is mostly, you know, that's what they base pretty much everything on now, isn't it, over there?
Yeah, exactly. But now we have an issue here in the Western Pacific where you have, I would say, no less than 4 agencies, the official JMA and the unofficial JTWC, Pegasa, and CMA, Chinese Meteorological Agency. And none of the 4 of them are really performing up to par at all. All of them really vastly underestimated a couple of typhoons this season, and especially JTWC being very egregious with some of their underestimations
Recently.
And every once in a while, they'll also go way over with the storm. Like I remember Typhoon Moranti, they put that up to 190 operationally.
195 in the end.
Yeah, and it definitely didn't look anywhere near that. And the thing is that there's also not really any good publicly available model data for the Western Pacific like there is for the Atlantic, where if you go into the Atlantic, you see the model runs for intensity and track. You'll have like 20 different models pop up. You go into the
literally
West
on some storms, Devon, in the Atlantic, you literally have about 80 models.
Yeah,
that are publicly available.
80 models in the end of it. 80 models in the end of it when you really count everything up, and more than that once you start counting ensembles.
Yeah, it doesn't even include the ensembles.
But if you want to start looking in the Western Pacific, I mean, what is there really for intensity guidance? Just the HWRF? I mean, there really isn't much for the West Pacific, at least for publicly available data. Maybe the JMA has their own models that they don't show us, or the U.S. Navy has their own models. Well, they have the COAMPS model, and that is listed there.
And we'll sort of, you know, we sort of then look towards climatological norms, and that's like the blind leading the blind, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, and there are some storms, and we've seen it this year, that don't really have any climatological counterparts to them at all. It's really difficult to tell what is exactly going to happen with some of these storms. So basically, what I'm saying here is that these meteorological agencies, they have a very difficult job. Either they don't have the appropriate amount of data to make a good prediction, or whatever data that they aren't releasing to the public, they're not using efficiently enough. And that ends up becoming a problem where you have an automated service like the JTWC putting out predictions based on 2 maybe 3 model runs at best, and that's really not a good prediction. And you have the JMA using whatever data that they have, and you end up getting some rather poor performances based on satellite appearance and based on what the future track is going to be. You're going to end up having poor performances. And that's pretty much what we've seen. It's really come to a head this year.
You think this is the tipping point? Okay, I just want to remind people of the poll that we're running tonight. Later on in the show, we're going to be discussing it in full as well. Hurricane Matthew, 2 years ago, and, well, depending on when you go from the origins to the ending of the storm, its origins 2 years and a week. How strong do you think it was? It's a bit of a sticking point with some of our members, and we'll find out which ones later on. I think some of you may well know. But we're running the poll. Do you think Matthew was a Category 5 at peak? So far, 88% say yes. So we'll have a chat about that one later. I want to bring Dane in on the conversation now about the JTWC. Do you think that people are putting too much stock into the JTWC, and is it really their fault, considering the relative weakness of the other agencies?
As it stands, I would say that the JMA is better than the JTWC, but I think that's like in turn, in a slightly unrelated point, is a bit harder to navigate. And what I'll say is, if I was there and I were to change one thing, I would add recon, for sure.
Add recon.
Close.
I guess for them it would feel like a step back.
Add recon and have the JMA do it.
It's a step back in time only. I think recon is invaluable, surely.
I think recon is definitely a valuable tool.
I believe we're now also joined by Orlando at last. What's your take on the JTWC past, present, and future?
JTWC right now, I believe it would. Right now, for what it's worth, it's all right. I think it would be better if they would have. Not sure if they're doing this currently, but if they do reconnaissance flights and missions into storms, it'd probably provide more data and more accuracy forecast, especially in that region.
Go ahead.
To counter your point here, Orlando, and to kind of counter Dane here, is let's say we have these recon flights here. I think that the Dvorak estimates that we can come up with, I think that we can get them accurate to about plus or minus 5 miles an hour. According to the recon data, there are some like extreme outliers. Hurricane Irma immediately comes to mind, but very typically you can usually get plus or minus 5 miles an hour using the Dvorak technique. And I'm just wondering, like, what data do you think that recon flights will be able to produce that will increase the accuracy of current advisories and forecasts for the JMA or JTWC?
Well, let me put this in for you first, Devon. The reasoning quite often for the Atlantic reconnaissance is to provide variables for the model data. Now, would that increase the appetite for model output over there? Would they be considering putting out more of those as they do in the Atlantic, what we discussed before?
Yeah,
if they had recon.
It would be great if more models would jump on and there would be more data. More data is always great, but you have to question yourself: are they actually going to do that? Are they actually going to put the time, the money, the resources, go through all the bureaucracy to get the funding for such a program?
Well, I don't think America is, are they? The
Yeah,
JTWC
exactly.
don't look like they'll be doing it.
And the JTWC isn't going to be doing this. Like, this is... If the JTWC or the U.S. Navy wanted to do flights into storms...
They probably want to, but
they've
obviously
got
they've got their budget limits, of course.
Exactly. Like, if they wanted to do flights, they would. They can get off of Guam. I think there's a U.S. Air Force base in Manila that they can also fly out of.
Okinawa?
Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I don't know about the Manila one, but Okinawa definitely.
Okinawa? Okay. But there's a U.S. Air Force base somewhere over there. You can fly planes out of there, too. So we would be able to do recon missions. Clearly, we don't have the funding allocated for it, so it isn't going to be us.
Dane,
This
go
is
ahead.
pretty much.
Sorry.
I was just going to talk to Orlando about Dvorak. When it comes now, keep in mind that Dvorak is an estimate. An estimate is not anywhere close to a guarantee. There's storms that can look really terrible that are really strong, and there's storms that can look really good that are really weak. Well, with physical recon, you are physically going into the storm and seeing how strong it is for yourself. And having that account from physical data as to how strong something is, I would say it's definitely better than an estimate given by Dvorak.
Devon, do you think that's a valid point given how, or Orlando, I don't know who wants to speak first, do you think it's a valid point given for, say, low to mid-range storms that are intensifying and the eye may not be completely visible to satellites?
Well, I can tell you from experience, because I've gone through the paper. I've actually analyzed numerous storms using the 1984 Dvorak technique and used a little bit of modernization of my own spin to make it even more accurate, adding in quarter Dvorak points for very minor changes. And I will say that it can get very difficult to determine how strong a storm is based on a central dense overcast feature. Shear, you can usually tell how strong the storm is very easily from that. If there is an embedded eye, you can usually tell that from microwave. That's usually easy to find. But it's these weird, I would say, in the range of 50, maybe even 45 to 75 knot systems, somewhere in there. That's where errors are typically the highest with subjective analyses. It's very difficult to tell just how strong the storm is. You can use all the microwave data you want. You can use all the satellite data you want. And I still think it would be extremely hard to get within that golden plus or minus 5 knots range.
All right. Does anyone else want to follow on from that? Forever hold your peace. Okay then, well, we are running that poll tonight on Debate 13. We're here for the hour. On our community tab on the YouTube page, I can tell you there's already been over 350 votes, and it is still 88% yes on Matthew being a Category 5, which will certainly be annoying some quarters. So we'll see what they have to say for themselves later on when we cover that topic. Well, let's move on to our second topic tonight, and that concerns what was the title actually? It was about forecasts and what is fit for broadcast. That's what it was. This sort of is a disturbing trend that we've been noticing in more recent months and years. Obviously, as things become much more mainstream, information is much more accessible than it used to be, especially when it comes to the subjects of model runs. And a lot of models can say a lot of crazy things, and some people and some organizations put out these speculative long-range doom runs that people often have to take a lot of caution with, because it's only one run out of a whole raft of runs, especially if it's long range, and there's so many different models. But where are those limits to what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate? Who'd like to begin on that? No
well,
one.
it's either me or David specifying that.
I think Devon had some issues just then. So Dane, start us off.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and go first then. So when it comes to model runs, once you get beyond 5 days, that's when things start to get iffy on model runs. That's when NHD forecast cones ends, because that's when things get too uncertain.
And quite often
And
their cones can be quite large, and their errors can be as well. But they've done really well recently, as an aside.
Yeah, and when it comes to going beyond 5 days, I think it's a bad idea to do so. In fact, I think local news would actually be better if they showed 5-day forecasts instead of 7.
Are you talking in terms of storm forecasts or general weather?
I'm talking like not only in storm forecasts, but in general weather, yes.
Well, the thing is, when you get up to the higher latitudes, the weather becomes a bit more predictable. In the UK, I would say that a 7-day forecast is reasonable, but when you're talking about, you know, non-domestic systems, I guess I would call them, hurricanes and the like, rather than your typical, you know, peaks and troughs and fronts and showers and everything and high pressure systems and all that, they're much more large scale for one, so that makes them more predictable. Much less predictable are the hurricanes, because they respond to these high pressure ridges just as Florence did, and that's going to be an example that we'll be looking back on for a long time about how things can be so uncertain as they were during that storm and all the others recently. But I would be inclined to agree with you for that 7 days is just too much of a stretch at the minute when it comes to tropical cyclone forecasting, right?
Yes, definitely. And like, no, I'm decently far north too. I'm not quite as far north as you, but I'm still decently far north. And what I've seen happen here, but before, is the National Weather Service overissues the advisories in comparison to where something actually falls. Like if the rain snow line is projected to come right through here, they'll give us an advisory, but the uncertainty drags it south, and it was completely unnecessary.
I see. David,
so,
what are your thoughts?
So I think in northern latitude. So I think even in northern latitudes, the weather still can be uncertain as to like the exact path of something.
All right, David, where do you think is there a red line that shouldn't be crossed when it comes to broadcast etiquette?
Well, the media over here in Australia, I can go back to Tropical Cyclone Yasi. There was a lack of information and coming out to the public, and from my own private contacts within our parliamentary system over here. This is just as an example. When Yasi crossed the coast, it just highlighted the need for information. Yes, the media, as we know, overhype things, but looking at the Bureau of Meteorology, the rainfall is 4 days. That's updated every 12 hours. Then we have the 7-day, oh, actually it's an 8-day outlook, and that's updated 24 hours. There is a very big question mark over the operation.
A question about your local or your regional service, of course, the Bureau, issuing cyclone advisories in the Australian region. How good of a job do you think they do, just as an aside there?
Well, there was quite a bit of opposition from the Premier of the Queensland government over here, and it was a wake-up call to the Bureau of Meteorology, and they decided to issue hourly advisories. But I don't support hourly advisories unless it's close to
Hourly advisories on storms?
Well, the storms are a different kettle of fish because
hourly advisories on what in that case?
Cyclones.
Ah, yes, that's what I meant.
When it comes to severe thunderstorm activity, they're very lacking, and they have this criteria where you've got to have all 4 steps before they'll issue a advisory. There was a recent incident just over a week ago. But Nathan,
yeah, let's just bring you back to the content of the question at hand. It mainly ties in with the models, but what media organizations and agencies and people who put out these updates, do you think that enough education is out there for the general public to be able to decide for themselves what a bad model run looks like, what a speculative model run looks like?
Well, when it comes to the media, especially the TV stations, they have their own models, but they still source all the information from the Bureau of Meteorology. Fairfax, which is one of our major media outlets here in Australia, they've got weatherzone.com.au. Their service isn't bad, but with the models, Nathan, we know that there are numerous models, and there's well, let's say probably 95% don't even get into the public arena. But if let's say we look at 4 models, and if they're generating the same information, well, you know, there's model agreement, and
we need some sort of model confidence scale, don't we? Something that compares all of the model runs. That's something that some clever clogs can work on. It's not going to be me. And just a quick one, David. Is Force 13? It is a media representative as well. Are we responsible for what you've seen?
Well, I think Force 13 has a fantastic future.
Oh,
it's providing the information, and the information, well, the record speaks for itself, but I enjoy the information that's being transmitted. And
all right, thank you, Orlando. I'm sure you've got an opinion on all of this at hand as well.
I mean, I believe media and such agencies should hold themselves to a better standard when it comes to not just forecasting, but also its operation.
Do you think that people put out enough of a disclaimer with these speculative model runs? We're the people who watch these things all the time. We know how temperamental the GFS is, for instance, and the HWRF at times. But the public who just come on, who go and look at what's going on when a storm is headed for their house, they've never looked at a model run before closely, don't know the difference.
Yeah, that's a problem, and also people find alternatives on YouTube, and it gets very tricky when they start showing
like
the model runs beyond Heck, even 10 days.
Well, hey,
they show-
I mean, a lot of our streams are unscripted, especially when we're doing live coverage. We know when someone shows okay, someone's going to show us a model run, showing a GFS run, a loopy 384 hours out, 16-day loop of a crazy scenario, and I usually laugh at them and tell them to stop showing.
But yeah, like people that are find alternative media on YouTube and such and other websites, they should be careful at what they see, and it's a problem when I see sources that they claim to be like they serve the truth and nothing but the truth, but in reality they're just giving out sham models that are extremely unpredictable 7 days out. It's even as far as I'd find as reasonable, and that's a stretch. And for like as storms and weather events, major weather events, and when they don't leave any disclaimers or anything like that, and just serve it as like almost as if it's fact that it's going to come out this way, like if it's set in stone, that's where my problem is, and that's where I get really frustrated.
I certainly discourage that here. And I think a bigger moral of the story is certainly not to trust any UK tabloid newspapers. Anyway, moving on. Well, you know.
That's another topic.
I think I know who you mean.
It's not just the weather not just the weather they're wrong on. Really, it's bad here. It's always been. Does anyone want to add anything to that particular discussion? If not,
I mean,
in just a minute, I'm going to take some questions from viewers. So send them in now. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. We'll take any questions on the two subjects so far. Orlando?
Yeah, but like the United Kingdom newspapers, they're interesting to say the least. They love to use clickbait titles. That's a good.
It's getting worse, not better.
Yeah, I think fake news.
And considering I'm over here on the east coast of Australia, I monitor numerous accounts on the Twitter platform and the media. I do engage with some of the media people over here, but when it comes to the United Kingdom, well, we know one particular...
Well, what would you say to this proposition? Do you think it's okay for an individual or an organisation to say that we think scenario X is going to happen rather than scenario X is definitely going to happen, or we know scenario X is going to happen, especially if it's speculative?
Nathan, over here we have the Australian Communications Media Authority, which was it took there was a major restructuring back in the I think it was the 90s, broadcasting telecommunications will differ, but the ACMA is the national watchdog, and they under Commonwealth law there are very strict regulations for misreporting, and the media can be fined very heavily, and misreporting, it's just unacceptable here in Australia. And if a media outlet puts out something that isn't true, well, if it's a TV station, they can get fined. We have a newspaper council, but here in Australia, it's not. It doesn't go down well with the authority.
All right then. Well, we've got 25 minutes left to play with, and I have a sneaky suspicion that it might be all on our final topic of tonight. Assuming Devon's ready again, he's here with us again now. But before we get on to that, I'm going to take a look at the latest poll results. So far, over 440 votes. 87% say that Matthew was a Category 5 storm at peak. We've got lots of comments on it, so we'll see. Let me just see what people say about it. Gemlord Allen says, of course it's a Category 5 hurricane. More questions here. Okay, that's strange. Not questions, comments. Lots of people saying random things in those comments, actually. Matthew is a category 5 because it was so intense and strong. Definitely, although minimal category 5 is what I think, so maybe not agreeing with the 165 miles per hour given. Wind speed says 165 in analysis, however the pressure analysis makes you think how the hell Opal didn't make it to category 5. Another one, I felt it was a category 5 a few hours before the NHC upgraded it initially, and considering they bumped it up after reanalysis, I don't think there is much to debate. Well, to counter that suspicion, I bring you Devon. Make the case for Matthew not being a category 5.
Well, this is probably the easiest case that I've ever had to make. And that might come as a surprise to a bunch of you people. So there's a lot of pointers where people say, oh, Matthew had to have been a category 5. Yeah, well, here's the issue. And I point to 3 reasons why I believe that Matthew's peak was 155 miles per hour. The first reason is the recon. Recon went in. Only once did the recon flights ever find a category 5 SFMR reading, and it was 142 knots. The thing is that that same recon flight recorded a 140 knot flight level wind at the same time as the 142, and every other SFMR reading on that flight was flagged before they eventually had to cancel it and return it to base. So the fact that they would just randomly accept this 142 reading, meanwhile disregarding all the other readings that happened on the flight, seemed very suspicious to me, to say the least. So I don't think that that 142 knots SFMR reading was legitimate. And let's just say, okay, let's assume that it was. Even then, that 142 knot reading would have still been a 10-second wind, and that would not translate to an intensity of 160 miles per hour. It just wouldn't have. So that brings you to the second point, and that would be the satellite appearance of the storm. And this one is really easy, honestly, because it all comes down to pretty much how warm was Matthew's eye on satellite appearance. Obviously, recon will go in there, they'll find 20 degrees, 25 degrees, whatever. It's about how warm do they see the eye from the satellite, because that shows how clear and well-defined the eye is. Matthew's eye was, at least at the peak imagery, as they so call it, the eye was actually very oval shaped. It was not circular in any mean. There was a pronounced oval to the system, and the eye wasn't very clear at all. The best eye temperatures that I have seen for Matthew, at least out of the images I've looked at, going to Navy, they have the eye temperature as high as 10 degrees Celsius. But that's Navy, and they usually overestimate. They usually produce images that produce overestimations. The RAM imagery only produced an eye temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. And
4?
considering...
I thought it was higher than that.
I never saw it higher than 4. At least with the RAM imagery. Navy imagery was definitely higher, but the RAM, no. And then you have to take a look at the cloud tops. Now, there was a white ring all the way around the eye, which if the eye was greater than 9 degrees Celsius, yes, that is a classic Category 5 appearance. So there was a white ring on Dvorak all the way around the eye. There was also an asymmetric... there was a asymmetric cold medium gray ring around the eye. So that's not necessarily going to bump it up a full half of a Dvorak point to push it up to Cat 5 if the eye was not warm enough. And indeed, that ends up being the case. And whatever CDG, cold, dark gray cloud tops that were appearing on the Dvorak, they weren't anywhere close to covering enough of the central dense overcast to the point where you would say, okay, it's going to count for something. Ends up now. So counting all of the asymmetries and saying what the eye temperature is, my satellite estimation would be for 155 miles per hour, based on that reading.
Well, there it is, folks. Any comeback on that in the room right now?
Keyword that you literally just said, Devin. Satellite estimates. You're using Dvorak or for reconnaissance again for some reason.
Well, I was using satellite estimates and got Category 5.
Yes. Well, I just pointed out the errors in the recon flight during the peak of Matthew, the hours just before the peak of Hurricane.
What we're showing on the screen right now is the post-analysis from Force 13 at the time, showing all of the recon points and what Force 13 got on its satellite estimates. You know, it is very close, you gotta say. You know, you look at the blue line is the wind just about reaching above that Category 5 phase, and not for a very large amount of time, but I think it did it and got to 160 miles an hour. I don't know where they found 165 either.
Yeah, I might disagree with 165 as well. I believe it was 160.
Devon, how do you think they came to that conclusion?
Well, the reason why I think they came to that conclusion is that they concluded that the recon estimate of 142 knots was 100% legitimate, and they counted that as the 1 minute sustained wind speed. And they assumed, oh, since the satellite appearance was ever so slightly better in the next few hours, we're going to put it up to 165. So that's their rationale behind putting the storm up to 165.
Just look back at that chart again. I'm just curious as to what I saw now. So, the recon flight, just remind us the maximum winds that they got during that flight.
142 knot, 10 second on the ground.
But, if I recall, that happened about an hour or two before its best satellite appearance.
That's basically what I just said.
And that doesn't make any odds to your point of view?
Well, basically what I'm saying here is that the recon, that one recon measurement can't even really be trusted because it had that weird flight level wind, and because of the satellite appearance at the peak. Neither of them really point to be a Category 5 in my eyes.
Well, if Devon has convinced you, please let us know. Start your message with Force 13 all in text, and I'll be monitoring that poll as well. You haven't made a dent in it yet. 87% still saying it was a Category 5 at peak.
That's a 1% increase.
And 13% though do say no. 13% of 491 votes agree with you. What's that? I can't math at the moment. About 60.
Almost been fluttering between 87 and 88 for quite a while now.
That nearly 60 people, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
That's quite a few, actually. Interesting. Orlando, any thoughts?
He's muted.
He was just.
I mean,
now, but there he is.
I think Devin presents a pretty reasonable argument, but I'd still like to hold on to believing it was a very minimal, barely Category 5.
Hold on a minute. Holding on to it. Now, what does that mean? Is there
basically, I disagree with Devin.
Is there no counter evidence?
I mean, okay, I'm like in the middle of it's not a very good situation I'm in right now. Okay.
I just think
Say
its
the least.
satellite appearance was good enough for a very short amount of time.
Yeah, it was. I believe it was briefly Category 5 due to satellite appearance, and that it eventually improved even post reconnaissance flight. I don't really believe it was still Category 5 though, when the NHC decided to put it back.
Now
Wait, just a minute.
Point.
Can you just remind me when
Okay.
they put it up to Category 5 operationally?
I believe it was later on that evening or something along those lines.
I can't remember when it was Cat
can I.
5 operationally. I believe it would have been on the 6Z
It's a bit
advisory.
foggy now. 6Z that late? Oh God.
I think it was 6Z. I don't think
you know,
they
it's
had
quite
it at
foggy
5
going
at
back
0.
2 and a bit years ago now, but I think at the time we called it a Category 5 just before they did by about an hour or two. I can't remember now. I'm sure we've got viewers with much better memories than I have. They always prove that the case. If you've got any questions for the team in the next 15 minutes, we'll open it out to the whole viewing floor and discuss any of the 3 subjects that we've been talking about this evening. David, I don't suppose you've got any thoughts about Matthew? You were with us when we were tracking it.
October
Well,
1st, reset.
3Z. Yeah, that's about an hour after I thought it. Okay, David?
It was a impressive system, considering my location. I'll go with Cat 5, but I really haven't done any homework on it. But
There's been over 500 votes on that now. Let's just see if I can find any convincing arguments for yes in there. No one. Really
If not,
said
I
anything.
can probably make one.
Go ahead.
So okay, so let's put it this way. So let's say Devon's right about the recon flight, and it was 155 during the recon. Devon agrees with that. Now, what we both agree on was that the satellite presentation improved for several hours afterwards. Right, Nathan? And right, Devon?
Yes, I do agree that the satellite appearance
Recon was in there
improved
about
in that time.
what, 0 or 1Z?
Yeah,
So
it
that would
was
mean
like
that the peak would be at 03Z, and in those 2 hours, the
think I
satellite
remember
presentation
I think I
would
remember the
probably
peak
would have
have
been
improved
2Z.
enough to count it as 160. So even if it was more 155 during the recon flight, like Devon is suggesting, I might still see reason to believe that it was 160.
Devon's not going to buy that.
Well, I certainly tried. That's what matters.
Well, the thing is that although I do agree that the satellite appearance did improve, the satellite appearance did not improve enough to the point where I would put it up an extra 5 miles per hour. What would have needed to happen is that either the eye needed to be more defined, or the cold medium gray cloud tops needed to be more symmetrical. Either of those two needed to happen, and although the cold medium gray wrapped further around the eye, which would be called an improvement, there was also a worsening of the symmetry of the eye appearance. And that is kind of what seals the deal there.
Huh?
So,
Fair argument.
do we have an image of do we have satellite of like Matthew during the recon versus like several hours after?
We've been
Do
showing
we have
one or
that by any
two
chance?
images of the storm at peak from the Force 13 archive. We don't keep many of the files though. So we've only got the storm at peak on this image here.
Oh, okay. Thought I should ask.
But you can
But
see there,
anyway,
this is on the RAM imagery.
But anyway, Devon.
Yeah.
But anyway, Devon, there's not a universal appearance to a necessary category of a cyclone, of a cyclone or a hurricane, for instance.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that. I'm pretty sure there's many people who would say Igor is a Category 5, and I'm pretty... Now I'm one of them, and I'm sure that there's plenty of other members that feel the same about Igor.
I've got a curious question, though. Devon, does Matthew's slightly unusual latitude play any part in your analysis?
Honestly, no. Mainly because a couple of other very strong storms in the West Pacific were even further south than this, and I used the same techniques on them. And people actually claim that I'm overestimating on those storms. So, if anything, that would end up being evidence for that I'm overestimating Matthew at 155, which I don't think I am.
And I know sometimes you make these comparisons, and I'm giving you the opportunity to do it again now. Very so often you say, if Matthew is a Category 5, then X should also be the case. Have you got any examples of that?
Yes. I would definitely say that if we're going to live in the same universe here, personally, I think that, well, maybe not necessarily if Matthew was a Cat 5, then X is a Cat 5, but rather if X is a Cat 5, then Matthew is definitely a Cat 5.
Okay.
Or did I just get myself backwards?
No,
I'm trying to think
you're
here.
confusing me now.
Well, okay. If Matthew is a Cat 5, I would definitely argue that Igor's definitely a Cat 5 because I think Igor was of better appearance. I would also
Igor
go
was
ahead.
a Category 5, enough said.
Oh,
I think so too.
there you go. I would also argue that Emily had briefly a better appearance than Matthew, and that would, and you know, we both call those storms Cat 5s, but we're going to say that Emily is 5 miles an hour weaker than Matthew, when I think it's the other way around. Emily's 5 miles an hour stronger than Matthew. You know, what are you going to do
Emily
there?
has been one of the biggest conundrums that I've witnessed so far.
Yeah, because it's actually very similar to Matthew. It had the Cat 5 appearance for one advisory, and outside of that, it never looked really that impressive. And it was also in a very similar location.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah. Interesting.
Difference is that I believe Matthew was moving a lot slower than Emily.
What would that mean in the case of Emily?
Well, basically that Emily would have been aided a little bit by forward speed. But that I don't think would mean too much in the grand scheme of 155 to 160 miles an hour, since that's so much more.
So would you say that, Matthew was moving very slowly when it reached that peak? Can't remember exactly what speed, but say if it was going double whatever speed it was doing, would you change your mind?
I think, honestly, that would have gotten it. You know what? I would actually be willing to say yes on that, because even though it's a very small change, that forward speed, even that little bit of forward speed, it would be enough to knock Matthew up to a Category 5 rating, because we're only talking 5 miles an hour difference here.
Just a minute, since you made that point, a lot of people are now talking about Jose. Is that one of those comparisons?
Yeah, during Jose, I very tongue-in-cheek made the assertion that Jose was a Cat 5.
Did you now? I don't remember that.
I did it in a very joking manner. But no, Jose had a great eye. The cloud tops weren't there. That's just straight up. The cloud tops weren't there for Jose. The recon, I don't remember the recon having any issues. So Jose, I would say that's definitely not a Category 5 weak. It's weaker than Matthew.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is.
I would say it's weaker than Matthew, and that would put it at 150 for me.
You put it at 150? Wow. Interesting. Anyone else in the team right now? Any comments? We're almost out of time. 5 minutes.
I was just going to say to Devin, so you said you used the same scale for analysis in the West Pacific versus the Atlantic, right?
For satellite analysis, yeah.
I think that's a problem because, in particular, West Pacific storms tend to be larger. They tend to, they have very different patterns in comparison to an Atlantic storm. They tend to be a lot bigger for one.
Okay. Well, I will tell you that most of the West Pacific storms that I have looked at have actually been either of similar size of Matthew or even smaller than Matthew at peak. Typhoon Yvette was a very small system. Haiyan's a notably small system. Bopha's a notably small system. Mike is a notably small system. Those are all storms that I've rated, that I've bumped up and rated very highly with my satellite analysis, and I don't really think that the size of the storm really plays into effect. It's just a matter of how organized is the eye and how organized is the cloud tops. You know, just because you blow up an image by 3 times doesn't mean that the image is any different. I mean, it means
Well,
that
it's going to be more pixelated. It's going to be more pixelated for sure.
right.
And
Right.
that's why people are
The
making...
image different, Devin. So that makes the image different.
And people look at GOES 16 on those up-close satellite loops, and it's so large, and people think it's a massive storm. In the case of Florence, it wasn't really that large a storm.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that people are saying that Florence was this massive system, and it really wasn't. You take a look at something like a Hurricane Ike. That was a massive system when that ended up going into the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, we even got impacts from Ike.
Yeah.
All the way up here.
I just want to mention, because we're almost out of time here, there's a lot of resistance about Jose. Lots of resistance. A lot of people think Jose is a Category 5. Maybe our next Debate 13 will be about
maybe
Jose.
Maybe Jose's an even better Debate 13 topic for next time.
Maybe next time. We're planning...
I'll stick with Jose at 155. I'll stick with Jose at 155.
Not bad. All right. Well, maybe we'll do that next time, hey?
I just don't see it. You need that full ring of, you need a full symmetric ring of white around the eye with the warm medium gray eye, at least 9 degrees, 10 degrees Celsius. You need at least that to have a Cat 5 appearance on satellite. Jose did not have that.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us in the team tonight on the debate panel. We assembled them at a moment's notice almost. Nice of you to join us. Thank you very much. That concludes our show tonight. We intend, if everything goes well, that Debate 13 will be running monthly. So maybe the first week of November we might see the next Debate 13 and maybe that conversation about Jose. Final result on that poll, there were over 530 votes, 545 actually. 88% said that Matthew was a Category 5. This is night 1 of 4 on the Force 13 channel that's going to have live coverage on something or other. Obviously we've got the storms out there as well, most of them are dying out. But if anything does come up, we'll obviously have updates on those. But tomorrow night, it's Guess the Storm. That is at 6 PM Eastern Time. Saturday evening is Holos Unleashed. Oh no. 9 PM Eastern. And on Sunday night at 8 PM Eastern Time, it's Force 13 Gaming. You can catch up on Force 13 Extra on the first 3 of those, and on Force 13 Gaming on our new channel there on the gaming stuff. But they will be aired live on the main channel over the next 3 nights after tonight. Well, that's all from us tonight, and we've been testing a few things here and there. Didn't quite work out as I'd hoped, but We're getting closer. But thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again soon. This was Force 13 Live, Debate 13, and we'll be back again soon. Good night.